Okay, calm down. You're getting nervous, man. You're getting nervous, man. Okay, calm down.
Hello and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We are really, really thrilled to have you here joining us tonight. We have an excellent show with many excellent guests. Oh, sorry about that. All right, let me start with that again. Hello and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We are thrilled to be joined by you. We have a great show for you tonight. We have multiple guests. We have two guests who are joining us live. And then I'm also going to, at the end of this show, play part of a pre-taped interview that I did with two American doctors who are, as we speak, in Gaza. And they have really, honestly, fairly haunting stories, but they're also incredibly inspiring people. And the patients that they treat are incredibly inspiring. So I have so much respect for all the medical workers in Gaza right now. Both the Palestinian ones and the ones who've traveled from other countries. So before we bring on our first guest, who is the inimitable Craig Mokhiber, I just want to invite everyone to give this stream a thumbs up. Please like the stream. That's a great way to support the show. Also, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. And you hit subscribe and then you hit the bell. And please do become Patreon supporters at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And when you're Patreon supporters, you get access to all sorts of bonus content, extended interviews, bonus interviews. So we have a full interview with David Cross, a full interview with Wallace Shawn. We have an extended interview that I did with one of the doctors who I spoke to today, where we talk about Alan Dershowitz and Norman Finkelstein. And yeah, just great stuff for people there. And again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. So during the second half of the show, or I guess the second third of the show, I speak to the Palestinian-American journalist Said Arikat, who people have probably seen very bravely arguing with, well, asking questions of, which sometimes requires arguing with because they're such liars, various spokespeople from the State Department. But before we speak to Said, we are speaking to Craig Mokhiber, who is a former United Nations human rights official and a specialist in international human rights law, policy, and methodology. On October 28, 2023, Craig stepped down as the director of the New York office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. In his final letter to High Commissioner Volker Turk, he harshly criticized the organization's response to the war in Gaza, calling Israel's military intervention a, quote, textbook genocide, end quote, and accusing the UN of failing to act. So welcome back to the show, Craig Mokhiber.
Thanks, Katie. Good to be with you again.
Thanks for joining. We always love having you. There's so much to talk about, but, you know, obviously right now as we speak, Israel has resumed its bombing campaign, its genocidal campaign on the people of Gaza. So technically, although the media has been pretty euphemistic about it, sometimes they don't even say they broke a ceasefire. They say like the ceasefire's in doubt, but obviously Israel has broken the ceasefire. But as you've pointed out in tweets recently, there really wasn't ever a ceasefire in the first place. So what are your thoughts on where we are right now?
Well, that's right. There was not a ceasefire for the entire less than 2-month period of this so-called ceasefire. Israel was violating the terms on almost a daily basis. It's true that it had shifted the bulk of its military attacks to the West Bank, where it had been carrying out an attack larger than any attack that had happened in the West Bank since the invasion of the West Bank by Israel in 1967. Massive sweeps of prisoners thrown into Israeli dungeons, destructions of villages, ethnic cleansing, and full-scale military assaults there. And at the same time was continuing both. As I've said, there's neither a ceasefire nor a cease genocide, because even in Gaza, there were periodic attacks murdering people in the Gaza Strip, and Israel continued to block humanitarian aid throughout the entire period. It's sometimes blocking the entry of food, blocking the entry of key necessities for medicine, blocking temporary housing like tents and mobile homes. So there was no ceasefire. The world was a bit distracted by that. I think that was a bit of theatrics that was cooked up between Netanyahu and Trump for the purposes of Trump's inauguration and for for Netanyahu's own reasons, to try to get out a couple of more of the captives in Gaza. But it never was anything that you would call a ceasefire. What they had done was shifted the focus. Now, what has happened now is that they've gone into, again, fully expedited genocide in Gaza, murdering, massacring hundreds of civilians since last night and continuing into today. The largest number of those who were killed, over 400, were children. After that, women. After that, civilian men, bombed in their refugee shelters in the middle of Ramadan as they were sleeping or as they were eating, in one of the largest massacres that we've seen during this genocide, and that coming after the publicly declared war crime of collective punishment by the Israeli regime that announced, in order to make the people of Gaza suffer even more, it was cutting off electricity, it was cutting off humanitarian aid, medicine, food, and so on, with another total siege. So the intent of the Israeli regime has not changed. The actions have not fundamentally changed, and they are clearly expediting now the genocide that started in October of 2023.
I mean, the fact that they're doing this, despite the declarations, the accusations, the allegations from people in the human rights community, you know, the ICJ case that said that there is a plausible case for genocide. What does this say about international law? Does it even exist anymore? Did it ever exist? Has it always been a facade?
Well, this is the sound of impunity. I mean, the irony of international law was, just as international law was being codified in the wake of the Second World War, beginning with the adoption in 1948 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and of the Genocide Convention. That same year was the year of the Nakba, the first genocidal ethnic cleansing in Palestine, the destruction of Palestine, the establishment of the State of Israel. And at that moment, an effort by the West, led by the United States and the United Kingdom in particular, to carve out an Israel exception to international law. And that virus that was planted in the international system all of those 80 years ago today got worse and worse and worse, to the point where you now have a live streamed genocide for a year and a half being perpetrated by Israel with the open and declared support of the United States and the United Kingdom and Germany, much of the West, with the complicit participation of Western media corporations that with which we're all familiar, with the participation even of US-based university administrations that are collaborating with the American government to silence those who are speaking out against the genocide in Palestine. That the roots of that were all planted just as the modern international system of international law was being built up. And now, because of the fact that the whole world can see what's happening, that this is an age in which as much as you have a blackout in corporate media, as much as you have a blackout in the dissemination of disinformation by governments in the West, people are still able to get the information through alternative media like this station, through social media, through live feeds and so on, where they are witnessing with their own lying eyes the genocide that is being perpetrated on the ground. And what that is doing, I think, globally, is it's calling into question the legitimacy of the entire international legal regime. Because if Israel can get away with an openly declared and publicly implemented genocide in Palestine, and the international institutions don't respond with everything they have to try to respond to this, then there's no such thing as the prohibition of genocide. There's no such thing as the prohibition of war crimes and crimes against humanity and extermination. There's no such thing as the prohibition of gross violations of human rights. There's no such thing as the prohibition of aggression and the unlawful use of force. And that is a world in which anything goes. That is the rule of the jungle rather than the rule of law. And that is where we're being pushed. I think, Katie, luckily, there is a counterforce, which has been working throughout this period and is working now as well, which is, indicated by a couple of facts. One, Israel is on trial for genocide in the International Court of Justice. That is truly remarkable. That case is continuing. Israel has been unable to defend itself there because it cannot rely upon Western-supported propaganda in a court of law like that. So there's that. Secondly, its leaders, including its prime minister and its former defense minister, and I think others yet to come, have been indicted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, including extermination. That too is extraordinary. The international human rights mechanisms of the United Nations, including the independent special rapporteurs and commissions of inquiry and independent treaty bodies, they have collected volumes of documentation and evidence and have come to the conclusion that Israel is indeed perpetrating crimes against humanity and acts of genocide. And that is extraordinary. That means that part of the international system is in fact working. Every major credible international human rights organization, Palestinian human rights organization, Israeli human rights organization, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, straight across the board, has also come to the conclusion publicly that Israel is perpetrating a genocide, that its leaders must be held accountable, that the regime must be paid to answer for this. The problem is that you now have this bifurcation, this split, where on the one hand, you've got a large part of the world. By the way, the majority of states, of countries in the world, including essentially all of the global south, by the way, many other countries as well, also coming down on the side of Palestine, in opposition to this genocide, in opposition to the acts of the Israeli regime. That is beginning to seed some diplomatic activity, the founding of the Hague Group of 9 countries that have come together and said, we are going to enforce the findings of the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the UN General Assembly. We're not going to allow our ports to be used. We are going to block anything that is flowing toward the Israeli regime for use in this genocide or in its occupation of the Palestinian territories. That, I think, is extremely notable at this moment. You have, even as the power of the U.S. empire is waning, which is not to suggest that it is not a threat to international order, the U.S., as it's going down from its position of the unipolar empire, could do a lot of damage on its way down. And I think that's what we are seeing today. But you are seeing other countries coming together in new diplomatic groupings that are gaining more and more influence and power, individual countries that are gaining more influence and power. So the United States and its Western allies is not the world. The United States and its Western allies, who are co-perpetrators with Israel in this genocide, are simply that. They're simply an alliance, and a very destructive one, that has decided that international law doesn't matter. But there are a lot of countries and a lot of people out there, including global movements and labor unions and social justice movements and peace organizations, human rights defenders, who have decided that it does matter. And so they are buttressing those international institutions that are trying to work toward accountability, even as the US government, the British government, the German government are working, and their adjacent corporate media are working to buttress Israeli impunity. I think that the trajectory is a good one. However, I think it's too long. And that's why we're witnessing mass murder on a horrific scale in Palestine. When justice comes, it will be too late for probably hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, as well as Lebanese and others, Yemenis and others in this assault. But international law is still standing. It's fighting back. And I think that those responsible, the courts, the judges on the ICC and the ICJ and the UN human rights mechanisms, they know very well that the whole world is watching. And if they do not respond with everything they have to this genocide, international law will no longer exist, as you say. The reputation, the credibility of those institutions will be gone. The reputation of those judges and international actors will be gone, and we'll be back to where we were in the 1930s in global politics. And that's a very, very scary place. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, speaking of silencing of dissent, but I thought we were back in the 1930s, according to our mutual friend Dana Bash, right? For her, the 1930s, what's reminiscent of the 1930s is the treatment of the basically Zionist students the treatment of Zionist students at universities is comparable to Nazi Germany, as she actually said. She said Europe of the 20s and 30s. But speaking of this co-perpetrating relationship between the United States and Israel, we actually have a clip of Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt making it very clear that this is not something that Israel did without consulting the United States. So let's take a look at this clip.
Well, the Trump administration and the White House were consulted by the Israelis on their attacks in Gaza tonight. And as President Trump has made it clear, Hamas, the Houthis, Iran, all those who seek to terrorize not just Israel, but also the United States of America will see a price to pay. All hell will break loose.
See a price to pay? That's not really the expression, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's the least of our problems. Okay.
All of the terrorists in the Middle East, again, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iranian-backed terror proxies, and Iran themselves should take President Trump very seriously when he says he is not afraid to stand for law-abiding people. He is not afraid to stand up for the United States of America and our friend and our ally, Israel.
So, okay, Israel, the law-abiding people of the nation of Israel. So, Craig, you are a human rights expert, a lawyer yourself. Explain this to us, how Israel is law-abiding and the Yemeni people are the terrorists. How does that work?
I mean, it's absolutely outrageous that she would use the term law-abiding people to describe an absolutely lawless regime that is perpetrating genocide, and the lawless government here in the United States that is complicit in that genocide and is committing crimes against people inside its own country as well. I mean, that's really remarkable. I think the second thing, when I see that, I think that's another clip for the genocide archives, another public confession of complicity in international crimes by a senior official of the government of the United States. And I think all of these things are indeed being collected so that they can be a part of the dossier of accountability that absolutely has to come. The other thing you'll notice in that comment is that, this is what I've been calling a magic word administration. The Trump administration thinks that if you just say some magic words like terrorist or Hamas or proxy, this is one of their favorites, or anti-Semite, or they think these are magic words that somehow dissolve international law and in the process dissolve facts and logic, and as I said, our own lying eyes. And that will work for, I don't know what that, I saw that there was a Hebrew subtext on that. Maybe that was on an Israeli television program. Maybe that will work on Fox News. That will probably work for a lot of people on CNN. As well. But for the broader international community, that doesn't work at all. There is a set of laws here. And simply saying, the magic words that the Trump administration, and frankly, the Biden administration as well, like to use, doesn't overcome facts, law, and logic. So I think they know that they are lawless, but I think this is a government that doesn't care about international law. And it clearly doesn't care about international law because it doesn't care about its own domestic law. These are people these kind of heritage foundation, right-wing characters who have always been dismissive of international law. Nobody can tell us what to do. We're Americans, that kind of an attitude. But if they are so openly violating domestic law as well, there's not much hope that they're going to be law-abiding people, to quote this lady, when it comes to international law. So it really is very, very outrageous, and it's I think a very dangerous signal for what is to come in the coming months as well.
Right. I mean, but you basically pointed out the question I was going to ask, which is how different. I mean, there are differences between Trump and Biden. We can get into that in a second, but when it comes to the magic words, I think the difference is, they both the Biden administration and the Trump administration used magic words like Hamas, Iran-backed, Hamas-run, terrorism, human shields. But the difference is what Trump doesn't really use are terms like democracy, rule of law.
Right.
I think that's the difference. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's the fundamental difference, is that the Biden administration was in traditional Democratic Party approaches, they were always trying to couch their crimes in language that sounded like they did have some modicum of concern for humanitarian concerns, for international law, and so on. And in some ways, it's refreshing to have just an open fascistic spewing of violent rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration, because the effects are the same. It's true there are some differences, but as the old saying goes, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the theater, right? Biden participated in a genocide, and I can't think of how some minor, polite framing around the edges makes that better than what Trump is doing. And it has to be said as well, Biden and many of those who came before him, they set the kindling for Trump's fire. They're the ones going back now for decades, really, and it reached a peak under President Biden, who created the possibilities for open participation in aggression, in genocide, for the persecution of students and professors at home, for the public smearing of Americans and people who are lawful residents here, and others. So all of this for the violation of their human rights domestically, just by using these magic words. This wasn't invented by Trump. It's just that Trump doesn't have any. He doesn't pretend to have to be a nice guy. He's just going to do it without the please and thank you. But he couldn't take it this far if it wasn't already set, going back at least, I would say, to September 11th, with the dismantling of many human rights and civil liberties in the United States, the Patriot Act, and so on. After September 11th, everybody from George Bush to Barack Obama to Joe Biden to two Trumps have contributed to this very dangerous place in which we find ourselves now. Right.
And speaking of lawlessness, we should mention that shout out to Netanyahu, because he not only gets to continue with this genocide, but as many people have pointed out, so Netanyahu's testimony in graft trial canceled for the day amid shock Gaza offensive. Prime Minister says prosecutors approved cancellation due to, quote, urgent security consultation, end quote, following resumption of hostilities. Which is, this is a headline that the great Mohammed Shahada, who is himself from Gaza, who lives in Europe now, he tweeted out that headline. And of course, it's just one more example of Netanyahu using this war for his own personal gain in on a very personal level.
In many ways, Netanyahu is the face of the genocide. He is in this war for a whole series of reasons. His own personal reasons, which means he doesn't want to go to jail, which he likely will when the distraction of war and murder ends, which is a sad statement of Israeli society, by the way, that there's so much support in Israeli society that they will even forget their grievances against him if he promises to kill more Palestinians or neighboring Arabs. So there's that personal thing. There's also an ideological one. I mean, he is a Jabotinsky, hard right, fascist Zionist who believes that the Palestinians are subhuman and that the only way to deal with them is through ethnic cleansing and genocide. And so he's very driven by that mission to be the person who is the tip of the spear in that genocide. He has political reasons for not allowing this thing to end, including his own coalition, which is made up of Kahanist ultra-fascist forces and constituencies, not just the people in the government on whom he relies to stay in power. And he has common sense reasons. He has been granted a blank check by his American sponsors, Democrat and Republican, to perpetrate any crimes, to commit any atrocity, to seize any territory, to bomb any country. And not only will they not impose any restrictions on that, but they will make sure that he's not punished for it in the international courts or in the United Nations, and they will continue to arm it, provide cover for it. So all of the entire incentive structure around Netanyahu is an incentive structure designed to ensure the continuation of genocide.
Right. One of the pluses, I think, of the Trump administration in terms of conducting an investigation or a case against genocide is that unlike the Biden administration, which kind of tried to hide behind their complicity sometimes, I mean, they did two things at the same time. They pledged their unwavering support for Israel, but also would constantly talk about having serious conversations, tough conversations, like Trump doesn't do that at all. So when Leavitt says what she says about how they consulted with the United States, that's great. It makes it hopefully that much easier for when the genocide case is brought, right? Because I've heard you point out that usually, or in many cases, you have to like dig through documents and go into archives and try to find it. But when you have this impunity, which you've referred to, the silver lining of that is that they don't even try to hide it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And, Trump and Netanyahu come out of a similar mold, this sort of authoritarian, openly racist, violent kind of a politician. And he, like Netanyahu, confesses his sins out loud. And I think that will be important for cases relating to complicity. But you're right. I think you make an important point, because one of the hallmarks of the Biden administration was what I used to call fig leaf harvesting exercises. So during the entire genocide, he would enthusiastically support it. He would make sure that all of his entire administration was disseminating Israeli propaganda, disinformation, justifications for genocide and war crimes. He made sure there was an endless flow of weapons and ammunition. He made sure to run cover for them in the UN, to use the veto 4 times to block even a ceasefire. But at the same time, he would say, we are telling the Israelis every day they must respect international law. He would send delegations to act as if they were doing something. He would build a port for millions of dollars, because even though anyone who knew anything about the situation knew that port could no way relieve the suffering of the Palestinians who were living under siege, that the only thing that would end it would be for the U.S. to order the Israelis to open up those crossing points, which the Biden administration would not do. So they would try to create fig leaves for plausible deniability, for accountability for the genocide, even as they were enthusiastic participants in it. Trump doesn't care about fig leaves. He's all in. He's issuing his own declarations about his own. Like the king of Belgium, what was his name? Leopold, yeah. Was going to personally own the Gaza Strip, ethnically cleanse it, and turn it into a big casino for himself. This is not a guy who cares about morality or law or any of those trivial little matters. And that is a difference. He says it right out loud.
Right. Masks off. I mean, yeah, even the way he uses the word Palestinian, openly uses that as a slur. I mean, he doesn't there's no hiding it. Yep. Usually people have use dog whistles, but he just literally uses Palestinian for bad.
Yeah, that was such his last accusation of Schumer as being a Palestinian when he was in the middle of his press conference with the Irish prime minister. I mean, that was revealing of so many different aspects of what a madman we have in the White House. I mean, first, he openly uses a nationality as an insult, right? So his racism is so blatant that he doesn't even try to hide it, much like the other things that we've been talking about. He is so extreme in his pro-genocide Zionism that he thinks that Chuck Schumer is too moderate. Chuck Schumer, the darling of the Israel lobby, the point person in the Senate for the Israel lobby, an ultra Zionist. I mean, that reveals, I think, a lot about Trump's. And then thirdly, I said this online, he said Chuck Schumer used to be a Jew and now he's a Palestinian. So he's so ignorant of the situation, he doesn't realize you could be both a Palestinian and a Jew.
Right, of course, right.
But he is just all ignorance and lies and violence and racism. And that's his brand, and it seems to work. And that's the remarkable thing about these kinds of demagogues.
Right. Well, you brought up Chuck Schumer, and he did start calling. I believe the first person he smeared as Palestinian was Biden. So he workshopped that during the first debate, right? And so then he brought it out against Chuck Schumer. And so, actually, speaking of Chuck Schumer, people may know that he has I actually bought it. I bought it quickly. I can't believe it. I should have written to the publishers, but I did buy his book, Antisemitism in America, A Warning by Senator Chuck Schumer. You'll see why I bought it, because I don't want to give it away, but a very special guest who I know respect very much, Craig, is going to be coming on the show, and he's going to be reading this book, and we're going to be talking about it. But Schumer is doing a media blitz. Let's take a look at his appearance, a recent appearance that he made on the great show, The View.
Really never that bad until 2017.
Oh, sorry. So this is him talking about anti-Semitism. Okay. Let me just, okay.
It was really never that bad until 2017. And until October 7th last year.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden,
When the Jews were attacked
when the
by
Jews
Hamas.
were attacked by Hamas initially, and the women raped, and the little babies' heads chopped off, and all of that brutally, and all of a sudden, anti-Semitism developed.
Okay. So a couple things he's saying here. So there was no anti-Semitism until October 7th, which is interesting, because I'm pretty sure he talked about anti-Semitism a lot before then. Also, the rape story, we've talked about this quite a bit. It's true that the media has still not officially come clean about their peddling this hoax, right? The mass rape hoax. I guess they haven't come clean about the babies, the decapitated babies either. But most people, I think, kind of avoid them because they know there isn't the evidence, but not Chuck. I mean, he's just, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely stunning. I mean, he is repeating long debunked genocide propaganda, which was fabricated by Israel for the explicit purpose of creating space to perpetrate genocide against the Palestinians by spreading these horror stories. And he knows it, and he knows that, Hamas did not attack the Jews on the 7th of October. They attacked Israel. No justification for any war crimes that were perpetrated on that day. But that framing is a distortion, which is meant to try to create a link between what Israel is doing in Palestine on the one hand and anti-Semitism on the other. And I think what it reveals again is Chuck Schumer doesn't give a damn about anti-Semitism, about actual anti-Semitism. Neither does the Trump administration or any of the other people who are using this language in order to advance a political agenda of impunity for the Israeli for the Israeli regime. And the proof of that is the fact that they are allying themselves with the most reactionary, far-right, anti-Semitic forces in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere in the world, because it was never about anti-Semitism. And I will not buy that book. I don't think I'll steal it either. But even without cracking it, I'm sure what you're going to find in there is an attempt to try to use the language of anti-Semitism to justify Israel's crimes against the Palestinian and against his neighbors. I'm going to guess that the person that you have reading the book is somebody who has an old connection to Chuck Schumer, went to the same school, and I'm just going to guess that that's who it is, and I'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah, that'll be great. Yeah, you're right. His former classmate. Yeah. So we actually, I'm sorry, you're welcome, or I'm sorry, but we do have a little bit more from Chuck. Brad, take it away.
To the left. Me being a progressive Democrat, I thought I...
Okay, so this is here. I know. We could just end the show right now. But here he is explaining who he wrote this book for, the left. Okay, and here's why. Particularly
to the left. Me being a progressive Democrat, I thought I ought to talk to people on the left that you can't be anti-Semitic and you're sliding into it. When you say by any means necessary, does that mean kill all the Jews? When you say genocide, a vicious term, that people may not feel Israel did it the right way, but it's not genocide. It's Hamas who does genocide, who wanted to kill all the Jews wherever they are.
Okay, Craig, I'm really glad you're here. Clear this up for me. You being a human rights lawyer, someone who has worked for the UN, is it Hamas doing genocide? Well, first of all, I like the way that he's offended. Couple things. Let's back up. I like the way he self-identifies as a progressive. That's newsflash. I like the way he seems offended. I mean, it's almost, for him, it's almost the war crime is accusing Israel of genocide. He doesn't like that. But then according to Chuck, it's not Israel committing genocide, it's Hamas. So what is your response to that? I
mean, you can just see his own Zionist supremacy. He says genocide? And he points to himself like, no, that can't be,
Exactly.
only we are victims of,
Yes.
of genocide, which is really wrong. I mean, it's so, it could be a clip from The Onion. It's every line is a lie or a distortion of some kind. I mean, somebody has to ask Chuck Schumer, why is it that the whole rest of the world agrees that what Israel is doing is systematic war crimes, crime against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and genocide?
Because, Craig.
Of course, yeah. Everybody.
Antisemitism. I held up the book Antisemitism for people who are just listening later. Yeah, right.
Everybody except the perpetrators and supporters of the genocide is an anti-Semite. Right. That's the way the lines are drawn in the world now.
Yeah.
The good news is that's not working on anyone anymore. When you have to start enforcing prohibitions against a definition of anti-Semitism in the US, which has been cynically, politically created to punish speech about the plight of the Palestinian people, then you're not convincing anyone. When you start arresting people and beating people and deporting people and expelling people and firing people because they refuse to accept your support for a genocidal, oppressive foreign regime that practices apartheid, and then you say you're an anti-Semite if you oppose that, it turns not just the law, it turns morality on its head. And people, except those who are actually a part of a particular cult, it doesn't work. And I only hope, and you and I talked about this before, I only hope that the damage that they're doing to the struggle against actual anti-Semitism is not going to be too deep and too long lasting. Because as the Nazis are marching in the street, by the way, very adjacent to these people, in terms of ideology and coalitions and support for Israel, by the way, and real
demonizing the enemy as vermin.
Right. I just hope that they're not that this period in history, this new McCarthyism, doesn't cause so much damage that we suffer a spike in unchecked real anti-Semitism as a result of it. Even as I have to say, I've never seen, even after September 11, a period of such violent Islamophobia, anti-Arab racism, and anti-Palestinian racism in the United States, which is not being expressed by discrimination, but violence perpetrated against people just on the basis of their ethnicity. And nobody in the Congress, including Chuck Schumer, gives a damn about that. What they care about is the right of people with a particular political ideology to support a genocide without being criticized for it. And that, I think that gives away the game.
Yeah, it really was stunning, wasn't it, to watch him get offended by the accusation of genocide? Like, he's more offended by the accusation of genocide than he is by what Israel's doing.
Not the least bit offended by what Israel is doing, I have to say. And you remember his,
not the least bit, right? Exactly. Yeah, that's not the offensive part. The offensive part is that someone would deign to accuse Israel of genocide.
Right.
That's the war crime.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. And it's, it's interesting because, Israel, of course, and AIPAC and the ADL, they really do cheapen real anti-Semitism. I mean, they minimize it because now people are so quick to dismiss allegations of anti-Semitism as weaponized allegations of anti-Zionism. So, every now and then someone is like, this is a random example, but someone called me a Jewish tramp the other day or something and said, like, there are no anti-Zionist Jews. And they named me and Max and Aaron and talked about how the Jews attacked the Germans, like real classic anti-Semitic shit. And then I said something like, oh, okay, he's like, you're an anti-Semitic tramp. I think I said, like, you're an anti-Semite idiot or anti-Semitic idiot or something. And then, of course, he's like, oh, of course, the anti-Semite label. Like, even though he is legit an anti-Semite, obviously, right? He's like describing Jews as attacking Germans. But now people are so used to, I almost felt defensive because I was like, no, but you really are an anti-Semite. I swear you really are. I'm not using that as code as anti-Zionism, but that is one of the dangers of what Israel's doing.
It's the danger because if everybody is an anti-Semite, then nobody's an anti-Semite.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is what they're doing. And the ADL, I mean, what to say about that horrific organization? It went from, I don't know, 100 years ago, and then for some decades being a kind of organization that was concerned about civil rights and so on. Then it morphed into a hardcore Zionist organization that would still perfidiously use the language of civil rights, but its main goal was to protect Israel. And now it's just a full-blown hate group. It's a neo-fascist hate group, in my view. Its main purpose is to attack a particular group of people, beginning with Palestinians, more broadly Arabs, and then anyone who protests against Israel, so attacking human rights defenders and peace activists and so on. That's its main purpose. It has become a hate group and nothing more, and a dangerous one too. And the fact that they still get airtime is an amazing thing to me. It shouldn't be, knowing the complicity of some of these corporate media companies. But they are a big part of the problem. They're a big part of the problem. Yeah.
Well, it was great to watch them give Elon Musk like a free pass. It was just so revealing. It was actually very helpful.
Yeah, Nazi salutes are okay.
Yeah,
Nazi salutes are okay. Protesting genocide, unacceptable.
Right. That's anti-Semitic. Yeah. That's the hate. That's the hate that we need to be worried about. Well, of course, it should come as no surprise that Chuck Schumer recycled these debunked claims. At the same time, he has never spoken out against the documented sexual violence against Palestinians committed by Israelis. In fact, you tweeted out a report from the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner, which was your office, right? You were the director of the New York branch of that.
Right.
UN, there's no escape from the conclusion that Israel has employed sexual and gender-based violence against Palestinians to terrorize them and perpetuate a system of oppression that undermines their right to self-determination. So can you talk about this report? Because certainly people will not have heard about it on mainstream media and will not have heard about it from Chuck Schumer. They won't hear about it from Sheryl Sandberg. More than a human can bear, Israel's systematic use of sexual, reproductive, and other forms of gender-based violence since October 2023. Yeah, so somehow Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, Sheryl Sandberg, Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, all these people who claim to champion women's rights and claim to want to combat sexual violence, gender-based violence, somehow when the victims are Palestinian, they're nowhere to be found, these champions.
Yeah, and in this case, so this is the Commission of Inquiry, which has a mandate from the Human Rights Council, supported by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, with strict human rights investigatory methodologies and procedures that collected evidence, that held a series of hearings, that viewed photographic and video evidence, material evidence of all kinds. And what they discovered was not just that there were some occasional acts of sexual abuse by Israeli soldiers, but that it is widespread and systematic, and that is an intentional part of the strategy of Israel. They said that sexual and gender-based violence is frequent and severe and perpetrated across the occupied Palestinian territory. And this is a quote, as a strategy of war for Israel to dominate and destroy the Palestinian people. And they documented all of these horrific stories of sexual assault, rape, forced stripping and public nudity, sexual harassment, threats of rape to terrorize young girls. And they said that these are part of the standard procedure by the Israeli military toward Palestinians. They documented rape, violence to the genitals, so damaging of genitals, including of men in this case. And they said that they have evidence these were committed either under explicit orders, so they were ordered to commit these sexual atrocities, or were encouraged to do so by the top civilian and military leadership of the government of Israel. And then importantly, it goes to the intent here. So again, widespread, systematic, encouraged by, sometimes ordered or encouraged by the hierarchy. And then they documented how a climate of impunity exists with regard to sexual and gender-based crimes committed by Israeli settlers in the West Bank, with the intent that they identified, with the specific aim of instilling fear into the Palestinian community so that they will leave, right? So they're using sexual violence in order to scare the Palestinians off of their land. And then they documented how the Israeli government and the Israeli military, time after time, did whatever they could to make sure nobody would be held accountable for this. So they made exculpatory statements and they took action to make sure that nobody would be punished for this, for example, in the military justice system. And the commission said that they did this to send a clear message to all members of the Israeli security forces that they can continue to commit these acts without any fear of accountability. And what the commission has said is that all of this evidence has to go to the International Criminal Court, but it also has to be brought for trials against Israeli soldiers and settlers who find themselves in other jurisdictions, that they should be arrested and prosecuted for these. And then there was a second set of things that they identified. You know, you remember, I think, from our previous discussions on the genocide in Palestine, that there are 5 specific acts that constitute genocide if they are carried out with the intent to destroy the people. And what this report does in another section is it documents how Israel has intentionally now perpetrated the 5th act of genocide in intentionally preventing births by Palestinian women in order to advance its genocidal goals. And they did this by systematically destroying all of the sexual reproductive health care facilities in Gaza, destroying the maternity wards with precision weapons, obviously imposing the siege and not allowing in any of the medication or anything that's needed for safe pregnancies or deliveries or postpartum and neonatal care. They destroyed the fertility clinic along with all of the embryos that had been stored there intentionally in order to make sure that those women would not be able to give birth. And this too was, is a specific act of genocide, which has now been documented and will be in the hands of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Courts. They said that Israeli authorities have destroyed the reproductive capacity of Palestinians in Gaza as a group through what they called, quote, the systematic destruction of sexual and reproductive health care, amounting to 2 categories of genocidal acts in the Rome Statute and in the Genocide Convention. And then they also documented how Israel has deliberately inflicted conditions of life on the Palestinians to bring about their destruction, which is another category of genocidal acts in the convention. And it's full of stories like, from horrific rapes all the way to schoolgirls trying to pass through checkpoints to go to school, Palestinian schoolgirls repeatedly being flashed with the sexual organs of Israeli soldiers who flash these little girls with their penises. And the Palestinian people in the West Bank, Gaza, including East Jerusalem, they are at the absolute mercy of armed men who think they are not human beings, who think they are objects, and they are defenseless in this regard. And we see the bombs dropping because it's so visible. What we don't see is the full catalog of absolute cruelty and horror and brutality that's being perpetrated on individual Palestinians who have to come into contact with these monstrous forces every day of their lives and just pray to survive those encounters.
Yeah, I just wanted to, before you leave, I just wanted to share one of these, a testimony that was included in this report. Okay, the commission documented cases of rape and sexual assault of male detainees, including the use of an electrical probe to cause burns to the anus and the insertion of objects such as finger sticks, broomsticks, and vegetables into the anus and rectum. One victim who had been detained in State Haman told the commission about severe mistreatment, including being suspended from the ceiling so that only the tips of his toes touched a chair and beaten with tools for hours. During the abuse, a metal tool was inserted in his penis repeatedly until his penis started bleeding and he fainted. The victim told the commission, "They took me into an interrogation room and suspended me by my arms behind my back. My toes barely touched the floor. A male guard inserted a metal stick in my penis on several occasions, about 20 times in total. I started bleeding. The pain was excruciating, but the humiliation was worse." So this is the type of behavior that Israel defenders are defending, and that the United States is paying for and arming and making possible and legitimizing and defending.
And this is a part of what's blocked out in the Western corporate media, which a result of which many Americans have no idea,
right?
The evil of the regime that is being defended by their government with their tax dollars. I think what's another important thing about this report, it shows that the sexual violence perpetrated by the Israeli soldiers was against women and girls and men and boys, straight across the board. Really depraved testimonies and stories of what the Israeli military is doing in its absolute dehumanization and persecution of the Palestinian people. And American, British, German folks out there, you are paying for this. You're paying for this.
Well, final question I want to ask you about was the persecution, detaining, kidnapping of people based on their ideas. One standout example, of course, is Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia, who was a former Columbia student, who is a green card holder. You have a lot of people trying to bend over backwards, trying to defend the attack on him, defend the fact that he was kidnapped, pretending that there's some legal reason for it. And then you have a Trump official actually saying, like, no, we're not. The question isn't whether or not he committed a crime. Can you talk about this, what we're seeing, this attack on free speech and this demonization of people whose controversial view is literally stuff like, one of the things he said is that, like, Palestinian and Jewish liberation go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. This is the terrorist.
Yeah, I mean, what you saw from the very beginning in this case was that they did not have an actual legal case against this person. So they made it very clear, I think, from the beginning, they were targeting him for his speech. And yes, green card holders have the full protection of the Constitution for free speech in the United States. The guy is a lawful permanent resident in the U.S. He was abducted at his home by a group of, I have to say, thugs. If you've seen the video, in plain clothes, they didn't identify themselves. He didn't know if he was being taken away by one of these Zionist hate groups or if he was being taken away by law enforcement, ripped away from his pregnant wife, who is a citizen of the United States. Besides, they didn't identify themselves. They had no warrant. There were no charges against him. He was not accused or even suspected of committing any crime whatsoever. Imagine. They disappeared the guy. He reemerged 1,400 miles away in Louisiana. They locked him up in this immigrant detention facility where he slept on the floor without even a blanket. All just because, number one, he protested peacefully against the genocide being committed by the Israeli regime with U.S. response and with the complicity of his own university, which is absolutely outrageous. And then to justify it, they've gone on television. So this is, just to be clear, it's an absolutely lawless act, again, in my view. And we could talk about that. But then, because they didn't have anything on him, they went on television and they just smeared him and told lies, all the way up to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, lying about his, Marco Rubio went on television and he said, well, no, but it's immigration grounds because he lied about why he was coming here, right, and we gave him a student visa. Well, he didn't lie. He said he was coming here to be a student. He came here to be a student and he exercised his rights. Secondly, he's not on a student visa anymore. He is on a green card. He's a lawful permanent resident with full rights in these areas as well. Then they lied, accusing him of being an anti-Semite without a hint of evidence. And to the contrary, every public statement about him is in solidarity with his Jewish sisters and brothers in the need to fight against anti-Semitism. They lied about connections to terrorism. And when you press them, you see they say, well, he was protesting against Israel, and Hamas also opposes Israel, and Hamas is a terrorist organization because we say they are, and therefore he's connected to terrorism. I'm sorry, that's not something that will hold up in a court of law. They lied saying he was a security risk. What security risk? The guy was complying with every law in the United States. He's never been involved in anything violent, never in any way threatened or claimed to be a threat of any kind to security. And they never presented an ounce of evidence of any kind about him being a security risk. No evidence of any crime, no evidence of any violence at all. They're using this language because they're trying to look for a hook. For example, in the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, I think it was, where if they could say the guy was, linked to terrorism or a security risk, they could use that as a hook. But there's nothing on that. And they didn't even accuse it of him when they arrested him. And when those, officers of DHS and ICE and whoever else was present followed unlawful superior orders to violate the human rights of Mahmoud Khalil, they never offered any such suggestions. So now what they're trying to do is they're trying to dust off this old law that says that his presence here has, quote, adverse foreign policy consequences. I mean, just imagine, my presence here has adverse foreign policy.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Most Americans oppose U.S. foreign policy in one way or another, and that's, green card holders are no exception. So they try to dust it off and to use this standard, which has been struck down before in federal courts, because of course it's too broad. I mean, what does that even mean? Marco Rubio gets to decide that an individual, for some vague notion of adverse foreign policy consequences, which the only thing you can say is that we're trying to participate in a genocide and the protest against it are making it harder for us to do it. Well, you're damn right.
Right. Yeah. It's like the one time they're being honest, right?
Yeah. What free speech is all about. Now, one of the judges who overturned this, by the way, was Judge Marion Trump Berry, Donald Trump's sister, who overturned it as unconstitutional because it was too broad, and then it was brought back, and there's a whole history of that. But they don't have anything on this guy. And yet, in an effort to silence, because, I mean, here's the thing, those student protests made a difference. They helped to educate people. They helped to bring the reality of the genocide that was being perpetrated into the consciousness of the American people, despite the best efforts of the U.S. government, despite the best efforts of Fox News and CNN and ABC and CBS and the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. They were bringing that story to the public. They were effective. And the fact that they were effective told the complicit perpetrators in the U.S. government, that's a hole that we have to plug. And how do we do that? We'll make them afraid. We will terrorize the students in this country and the teachers, the faculty in this country, and we will use everything at our disposal to persecute them so that they're too afraid to speak out against the genocide. It's not going to work. Luckily, there are good lawyers in this case that are defending Mahmoud Khalil. Of course, Mahmoud Khalil is not the only case. Right. They have been doing these expulsions and deportations and persecutions with the complicity of universities like Columbia and Harvard and others, by the way, against these students. And Trump has promised to continue this until he is stopped by a court. Now, I have to say that when the case that's happening at the same time with the deportation of hundreds of Venezuelans by Trump, again, unlawfully, where you actually had a judge issue an order to turn the plane around and bring them back. And the Trump administration said, ha, 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 we're not listening to the court, and then carried on with this unlawful activity. I don't know if you want to talk about that case as well, but it doesn't look like, even if there is, with a very unpredictable judiciary that's been stuffed full of right-wing, Heritage Foundation people, and Federalist Society judges over the course of many, many years, whether it will defend the rule of law or not in this case. Ultimately, these things will end up in the Supreme Court, I'm sure. what will happen there, and if the court comes down in a way which is consistent with law and human decency, whether the Trump administration will respect it remains to be seen. But what they're doing now with these other migrants, including the Venezuelan case, doesn't give me a lot of hope that this is an administration that's going to respect the rule of law.
Right. Well, I would love to bring on our next guest, and maybe you guys can overlap for a little bit, Craig, because you said, it sounds like you maybe have some more time. Said Arikat is here. But maybe I can just have both of you on, and then Craig, you can go off and do, because I know you've been very generous with your time. But because you offered discussing something more, I'm gonna grab that opportunity. So we're going to bring on our next guest, and he's the great journalist Said Arikat, who is the Washington bureau chief for Al-Quds, a daily newspaper which has been published out of East Jerusalem uninterruptedly since 1951. And this is a nice connection. In addition to his work as a journalist, Arikat is an adjunct professor at the American University. No, this is the nice connection part. That's also cool, but here's the connection. He served as the United Nations chief spokesman in Iraq from 2005 to 2010. So from one UN man to another, let us bring on Said Arikat. Hi, Said. Welcome.
Thank you. You were too generous. Of course, I'm so glad to be with Craig and with you. And
Nice to
when
be
you say bureau chief, it seems like it's a one-man show. So it's not that big. I have to cover everything American. Well, I'm glad to be with you, and of course with Greg. And these are very, very hard times. I was listening to Greg, and I'm amazed at all, how precise and how articulate and how descriptive of the real situation that we really live in. I mean, listening to Chuck Schumer, he's, I don't want to, but this is something that, unfortunately, the former administration basically perpetuated, intentionally. And it was to justify all these weapons and bombs and so on that were dropped on Gaza, with some estimates say that it's actually more than 2 or 3 Hiroshima-sized bombs and so on. So it was pretty bad. And, Biden, let's not forget that he kept saying the same story over and over again, even when his staff were actually telling him, don't do it.
Right.
This has been debunked, but he went on doing it. And, if you repeat it enough, it'll stick. I mean, unfortunately, that's what the authoritarian government do, and that's what dictatorship do, and so on. So he basically took a page out of their book.
Yeah, and it's true. Said, you reminded me of something, and Craig, you referred to this, but the demonization of students like Mahmoud Khalil, who's a former student, but it doesn't matter. I mean, he was a graduate student. He's at Columbia, and the demonization of students for protesting against the genocide was really started under the Biden administration. We saw that,
absolutely.
and they kept accusing student protesters of anti-Semitism. When we made a mashup here at the Katie Halper Show, and it was basically the vast majority of the violence and the hate speech came from the Israel supporters and was against the Palestine supporters. I mean, it was like a guy ran his car into 2 protesters that barely got any coverage. Can you imagine if it was the other way around? And Craig, you earlier brought up the violence stuff. I mean, people talk about Jewish safety all the time. There was a Palestinian child who was stabbed to death, and 3 Palestinians were shot, and 1 is paralyzed. And you don't hear Congress talking about that. They don't have hearings on that. Just that it's such a blatant double standard, and the dehumanization is just disgusting. And Said, I really want to thank you for being such a, one of the few brave voices in the press corps. And also, I feel just like, I mean, you must have a thick skin, because I feel like every day they're kind of like dehumanizing your people.
Yes. And, I endured 4 years or 2 years of Matthew Miller, who, constantly would ill-treat my questions and so on, do kind of facial expressions and so on that shows contempt. But, I have to be thick-skinned. I mean, these are my people, and this is my cause, to be quite honest. I try to be as professional as I can, but, how am I going to be professional when, on the day that Shirin Abu Akleh gets killed, they come up with all these junk stories. And I said, how could you say this? She was sitting right here, right next to me. And it is 100% true. She was sitting there with us, a few months back and so on. So you have to endure. Sometimes you get, a bit upset, and you try not to show it. But one thing for sure, I mean, the former administration was not friendly to the Palestinians. The one before that was not friendly. This one, certainly not. I mean, it's they use any possible description or accusation and so on, unfounded mostly, to levy on the Palestinians and anyone that supports them, not only the Palestinians. I have many friends who are, from different faiths that get all kinds of hate calls and hate messages and so on. It doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim, whatever, or Hindu, as a matter of fact. So this happens all the time, and it goes unpunished because people like Chuck Schumer, he's he has one mission. I mean, look at Fetterman. Fetterman actually, Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania. Yeah, his staff resigned because he only worked on Israel. His staff resigned because he refuses to do anything but work on Israel. And then someone like Bill Maher comes out and says, I think that if the Democrats nominate someone like Fetterman, maybe we'll have a chance, which is total nonsense. Of course, it doesn't make any sense. So
Right.
we are, but now, Katie, it's a different ballgame with these guys. I mean, the way the press functions, I mean, we are being assigned seats and so on. Historically, I've been sitting in the same seat for like 20 odd years, before and after Iraq. Now they're assigned to us, people who are not in the bullpen. Luckily, I am in the bullpen. They have to sign in, and each one has to sign that he's present. It's just like being in like school kids. So it's awful. And of course, we ask questions, they don't answer. Yesterday, she gave me a question, but I was not allowed to follow up, which is really
Right. Right.
It's crazy because
Especially it was such a non-answer that you gave, right?
And not only me, everybody.
Right. Yeah.
She goes through this on any issue, and it's and the one statement that we hear time and again, and we'll continue to hear, that the president is his own spokesman. The president speaks, we all listen, and so on. But these are horrific times. I mean, today, Catherine Russell from UNICEF said that Israel killed in one day more children than it has done in any one day for over a year. So it's, it is really horrific. What they do is horrifying. They're trying to basically force the expulsion of the Palestinians or force them to leave. And so I don't know what the plan is. But obviously, Israel is unhinged because Trump is unhinged. I mean, he's the one that spoke of depopulating Gaza, right in the presence of Netanyahu, who apparently was surprised, So we hear this talk. They all speak from both sides of their mouth, with a forked tongue, as the natives used to say, So we saw whether it's Witkoff, who basically changed positions all of a sudden and was threatening Hamas, much like Trump did, or basically threatening the people of Gaza. I mean, let's remember that on March 6th, Katie and Greg, and of course you follow this, Trump tweeted that death awaits the people of Gaza. He basically threatened the people of Gaza. I mean, imagine if this was, any president talking about any people anywhere in the world, you would be talking about it day in and day out. It barely caused, a little ripple in the media, in the media. So these are really very difficult times, and I think that the Palestinians now they have a lot of friends around the world. These movements and so on, they seem to be a lot stronger and a lot more enduring than we thought, but they are being targeted. I mean, let's see what's happening in campuses on George Washington campus, for instance. They outlawed or closed, whatever you want to call it, the Justice for Students for Justice in Palestine, the SJP. They closed their chapter. They're doing it in many other campuses. This is the trend, and they will continue to do it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, we actually have a clip of you, Saeed, asking a question to Tammy Bruce, who is a State Department spokesperson. So let's take a look at this.
Pertaining to Gaza, aid has not been allowed in since the 2nd of March. The situation is very dire. I was wondering if you are really concerned about this, especially, this coincided with the beginning of Ramadan as well, where people need food and water and so on. I mean, is starvation used as a method to pressure people? Isn't that a war crime of some sort internationally?
Well, for the horrible suffering of the Gazan people, we know where that sits. It sits with Hamas. We know that within the ceasefire, and why we fight for the ceasefire and want it to continue, is in fact to make sure that food and aid is moved into that region. The United States has led the way in that regard. We also know that at this point, when it comes to the nature of what Envoy Witkoff has worked on and what all of us still focus on is, in fact, what your concern is. Making sure that there's a situation on the ground that allows food to get to the people who need it, that allows aid to move through to the people who have been suffering because of the choices that Hamas has made throughout the years. And that is what we continue to work on. So everyone, certainly it's a concern, and that is why we continue to work to make sure that aid can get to the people who need it. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Follow up?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I mean, Craig, what are your thoughts as an expert in human rights law? How did she do in her answer?
Well, I hadn't seen that clip before, and I was reciting what she was going to say in my head before she opened her mouth. I was wondering how many words in she would get before she blamed Hamas for a declared act of collective punishment that Israel stated it was going to do. All kudos to Said, one of the few voices that raises international law in interventions with the State Department, because it's so important that this be on the record. If there is going to be accountability, at least in the future, having these State Department spokespersons and officials on the record having to address questions of international law that they're not going to get from the corporate media for the most part. Really important, so important what Said does there, and others who have challenged him. We all saw, those scenes of Sam Husseini and Max Blumenthal being dragged out of the briefing room because,
I was there.
Yeah,
I was there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I know you were. People like Said and Sam and Max, they do something that the stenographers in those briefing rooms don't do, which is they pierce through this veil of propaganda that the State Department and the White House and the National Security Council are so, careful in constructing, and that these obsequious reporters from a lot of the outlets go along with, and they stay within those margins. And so, when somebody actually practices journalism, God forbid, like Said does when he's in that room, it's hugely important, because a big part of this struggle, this genocide could not continue without the support of the United States government. The United States government support couldn't continue for a long time without the support of the American people. And the support of the American people cannot continue if they are aware of what's actually happening on the ground. They have gotten on side many of these big media corporations, but they don't have everyone on side. And thank God for journalists like Said and Max and Sam. Thank God for independent media like what you do, Katie, and some of the others out there, and for social media, because they are tearing down the veil of lies that are being constructed by these official agencies. So, thank you for that, Said.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I actually wanted to ask both of you to respond to this clip. Craig, you mentioned Marco Rubio and how he's lying in his analysis of Mahmoud Khalil, who, by the way, just wrote a really moving letter from his detention in Louisiana. But let's take a look, Brad, at this clip of Marco Rubio on Face the Nation from this weekend. And feel free to pause it whenever you want. Like, you can raise your hand and I'll pause it in case anyone wants to step in to say something, because it's pretty rich clip.
Views. Can you substantiate any form of material support for terrorism, specifically to Hamas, from this Columbia student? Or was it simply that he was espousing a controversial political point of view?
Well, not just the student. We're going to do more. In fact, we every day now we're approving visa revocations, and if that visa led to a green card, the green card process as well. And here's why. It's very simple. When you apply to enter the United States and you get a visa, you are a guest. And you're coming as a student, you're coming as a tourist, or what have you. And in it, you have to make certain assertions. And if you tell us when you apply for a visa, I'm coming to the U.S. to participate in pro-Hamas events, that runs counter to the foreign policy interest of the United States of America. It's that simple. So you lied. You came. If you had told us that you were going to do that, we never would have given you the visa. Now you're here. Now you do it. So you lied to us. You're out. It's that simple.
But
it's
is there any? But is there?
So, okay, no, he didn't lie. And no, it's not pro-Hamas. He's protesting against a genocide. And to be fair, how did he know about October 7th going to be happening, right?
Yeah, but they don't give, and when you apply for a visa, they don't ask you on the visa, when you apply for a student visa, what they're trying to establish is, are you coming here legitimately to study in a university? He said he was, he did, he didn't lie. Secondly, so that's just, I'm sorry, that's just nonsense, Secondly, he's no longer on a student visa. He's on a green card with all of the rights that that go along with being a lawful permanent resident here. And thirdly, he did not participate in, quote, pro-Hamas demonstrations. So everything that comes out of Rubio's mouth in this interview is either a lie or a smear, which is also a lie, and it has no legal basis whatsoever. This is just raw exercise, the raw abuse of power.
Yeah, I mean, if I,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I mean, if I may add, Margaret Brennan is someone who was with us in the briefing room for many, many years, and to be fair, I mean, she asked him the proper question. I mean, do you have any evidence? Do you have, or is it because he's supporting a controversial point of view? I mean, she said that. Obviously, Rubio, who has a great long record of anti-Palestinianism and basically catering to Israel in every which way, supporting Israel in all its efforts, supporting their genocide, their attack, all throughout, ever since he became a senator. So his position basically is so weak. I mean, it's so shallow. First of all, as Greg said, that students, when they get a visa, as a student visa, it's decided on the academic merit. They say that I'm applying for this university, and this university has to accept you to get the visa. I mean, this is not something that you can go and say, I'm here to get a visa, but once I get there, I want to protest against the United States of America. Or it's actually that does not happen, and there are a lot of students, both Palestinians, Arabs, and many from many other countries. They're quite accomplished academically, including Mahmoud Khalil. I mean, he's accomplished academically. He's someone that has a clear academic conscience and intellectual conscience to point out to any tragedy anywhere in the world. Probably, I mean, he speaks of the Palestinian situation because he's a Palestinian. He was born and raised in a refugee camp that happened to be there because Israel took over his home. I mean, these are the things. If he does not go out and say this is wrong and I want to be part of this movement, then there is something wrong. Now you have to question, why are people like this? I mean, basically hiding behind self-interest in this case is not going to get us anywhere. I mean, it's I know that, and Greg knows that, and you know that, Katie. Palestinians are really running scared. They're running scared, unfortunately, now because of the case of Mahmoud Khalil and other cases, because of phone calls, because of the threat. I mean, Rubio just threatened all students. If you do anything, we're going to deport you. Yeah. He threatened even all green card holders. Now we're going to go through the process on how you got your green card. We don't know what comes next. Naturalized American like myself. I don't know. It could be. Right. There's all kinds of something on a pretext that this administration is willing to do. So this is where the independent media has to come in and has to spotlight that day in and day out, because students are caught, between, whatever the hammer and the anvil, or whatever, as we say in Arabic, between the rock and a hard place in American. And because on the one hand, they want to be active, their families are there, their people, their cousins, many of them. I mean, I know so many students from Gaza who lost scores of relatives and so on. So on the one hand, and they want to focus on their studies. I don't see many, I mean, that's not to say that Palestinian students are special and so on, but they really are serious students by and large. They go to school, they work, they get jobs, they try to be as honest a citizen or as honest a person as they can be. And now to really basically threaten them that whatever you do, we're going to deport you if you do it under any pretext, it is really scary.
Yeah, it is really scary. And especially combined with what you referred to before, Craig, which is seeing that a judge ordered a plane full of, carrying Venezuelan people to be turned around. And they just said, no, we're not going to turn around. So even the what should be the natural, what's it called? Checks and balances clearly are not working. Let's just watch a little bit more of that Rubio clip.
Is there any evidence of a link to terrorism, or is it just his point of view?
Yeah, they take over. I mean, you should watch the news. These guys take over entire buildings.
They
vandalize colleges.
Intensely.
They shut down
I'm
colleges.
asking about the specific justification for the revocation of his visa. Was there any evidence of material support for terrorism?
Was the negotiator negotiating on behalf of people that took over a campus, that vandalized buildings? Negotiating over what? That's a crime in and of itself, that they're involved in being the negotiator, the spokesperson, this, that, the other.
We don't need
these.
Craig, I wish I had gone to law school because I didn't know that negotiating with the college administration is a crime in itself.
Not just a crime, it's an act of terrorism.
Right.
So of course it's terrorism. Don't you watch the news? They took up, because a sit-in is an act of terrorism. Right. In the mind of, in a just world, Marco Rubio would be in prison for the crimes that they're committing here. And Mahmoud Khalil will be the president of that university. But it's very, very dangerous. The one point that we didn't talk about here was, the way that they targeted Mahmoud Khalil. First, they thought he was vulnerable because he wasn't a citizen. And they're always going for what they see as the people, that they can pick on. But also, they did it in collaboration with Israel proxy groups, and not just Israel proxy groups, but Zionist extremist groups, whose job it is to harass and persecute Palestinians and those who protest against Israel. The U.S. government collaborating with these organizations who have genuine links to unlawful activity, and yet the government is taking their side against peaceful human rights defenders on college campuses. And, it's just another way that they have turned the law on its head. There's a provision in the Naturalization Act, in immigration law in the U.S. that says that if you have any way been involved in or supported a genocide, you are excludable from the United States. What the Trump administration has done is they've turned that on their head, and they've said, if you oppose a genocide that we support, you are excludable. Right. That's turning the law exactly on its head. And so you have, criminals in power and defenders of human rights in prisons. That's where we are headed with this.
They probably does behind closed doors consider like the student sit-ins to desegregate the South. He probably thinks that was terrorism, right? Like protests against Jim Crow. But sorry,
absolutely no. I mean, and coming from the top American diplomat, diplomacy is supposed to be his job. Negotiation, it could be his job. So talk about things turned upside down on their head. I don't think these issues ought to be taken lightly, because this is the thing. I mean, if you say something and do something, then you push it a step more or a step further, and that there's no end to it. And I think that what we see happening, not only to the Palestinians but also elsewhere. I mean, look. The United States of America went and bombed the heck out of Yemen in the last few days on behalf of Israel. I mean, this is crazy. Where is the tax dollars, the tax money, and so on? You're doing it on behalf of a foreign nation. You're threatening Iran that you want to go to war that could probably devolve into some sort of international conflict and so on. Maybe World War III. We don't know. So this is terrible. I mean, the American public ought to take a stand. I think this is a great time for the American public to say, look, this is not in our name. We have to correct things and so on. And what we see happening, that the statement that have come in the last 50 days or so, and it's hard to believe that it's been only 50 days, are really amazing. From the on the 4th, excuse me, I have a terrible cough.
Oh, sorry. Oh, you're okay?
Go ahead, great. So,
Oh,
just
it's
give me
nausea.
like-
It's probably nausea. Oh, it's ironic, Saeed, because remember Marco Rubio, of course, famously.
Oh God, I remember that.
He had dry mouth or whatever, and he grabbed a bottle of water, and then Trump
How appropriate.
told him and threw his water bottle. I mean, if Trump
That's
weren't
true.
a genocidal monster, he's like unintentionally funny, but then he actually does terrible things.
Yeah.
But
well, I'm saying that things. I mean, if a movement is not, and I'm not trying to provoke, I'm trying to agitate or anything like this, but in the end, things begin to happen without the public caring. If you look at it and if you view it as an outside observer and not realizing that this is done in your name and with your tax dollars. I mean, 100 fighter jets attacked Gaza last night. 100 F-35s, F-16s. There's not a single anti-aircraft gun in Gaza. Not one. There's not a single, ground-to-air defense in Gaza. It's just non-existent. So they basically, it was just, a shooting exercise, like shooting fish in a barrel, as the saying goes, and so on. And this went on for hours, and there was no response from Hamas. Simply, they don't have a response. I mean, this is an unarmed people. People tend to forget that Hamas is basically a ragtag militia. It's no more than that. It does not have an army. It does not have a support system. It does not have countries aiding it and supporting it. Iran was blamed for supporting Hamas and so on. Iran has ceased to support it. I mean, look what happened to Hezbollah. Look at what happened to Syria and so on. They are all alone, and they know that. And I think they are taking advantage of that. They know. Talk about why Netanyahu chose this moment. He chose this moment for these reasons. Basically, he knows. I mean, he tried to. He fired the Shabak guy, Ronen Bar. He brought in this crazy nut Zamir and put him at the head of the military and so on. Who speaks clearly and speaks openly of destroying and killing Palestinians and so on, and removing them and all that. He brought back Ben-Gvir, and of course Smotrich was there the whole time. So that this works to his advantage, and he wanted to pass the budget that is at the end of the 31st. I don't want to get involved in Israeli politics. It's crazy. So, but they have the budget confirmation coming in on the 31st of March, and he wants to do all this so he can pass, so he can stay in power. He's basically doing all this to stay in power and to basically to cater to the right wing, cater to the settlers, cater to all the nuts that need to expel the Palestinians.
right.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, this is relevant. So this before the Mahmoud Khalil issue, there were some students expelled from Barnard for interrupting a class, and it was the first expulsion of students for protest since 1968. And before 1968, the last time someone had been expelled for student protest was 1936. And that student protest was an anti-Nazi rally, right? So this is something that the great Susan Abu Hawa tweeted out. It's a screenshot of the New York Times. Friday, September 25th, 1936. Columbia hears plea from expelled student. Bark and two other speakers demand his reinstatement. At gathering of 500, 3 members of the American Student Union, including Robert Burke, who was expelled in June for leading the anti-Nazi demonstration last May, addressed a gathering of 500 students. So they are in good company, these students who are getting in trouble. But it's absolutely shameful. We also have a letter from Mahmoud Khalil, which I thought we could look at part of it. So he wrote this from jail. Let's see. My name is Brad. I think you have to press on one at a time because it's too small unless you click on it. My name is Mahmoud Khalil, and I'm a political prisoner. I'm writing to you from a detention facility in Louisiana, where I wake to cold mornings and spend long days bearing witness to the quiet injustices underway against a great many people precluded from the protections of the law. Who has the right to have rights? Hold on one second. Who has the right to have rights? It is certainly not the humans crowded into the cells here. It isn't the Senegalese man I met who has been deprived of his liberty for a year, his legal situation in limbo, and his family an ocean away. It isn't the 21-year-old detainee I met who stepped foot in this country at age 9, only to be deported without so much as a hearing. Justice escapes the contours of this nation's immigration facilities. On March 8th, I was taken by DHS agents who refused to provide a warrant and accosted my wife and me as we returned from dinner. By now, the footage of that night has been made public. Before I knew what was happening, agents handcuffed me and forced me into an unmarked car. At that moment, my only concern was for Noor's safety. I had no idea if she would be taken too, since the agents had threatened to arrest her for not leaving my side. DHS would not tell me anything for hours. I did not know the cause of my arrest or if I was facing immediate deportation. At 26 Federal Plaza, I slept on the cold floor. In the early morning hours, agents transported me to another facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey. There, I slept on the ground and was refused a blanket despite my request. Jesus Christ. My arrest was a direct consequence of exercising my right to free speech as I advocated for a free Palestine and an end to the genocide in Gaza, which resumed in full force Monday night. With January ceasefire now broken, parents in Gaza are once again cradling two small shrouds, and families are forced to weigh starvation and displacement against bombs. It is our moral imperative to persist in the struggle for their complete freedom. I was born in a Palestinian refugee camp in Syria to a family which has been displaced from their land since the 1948 Nakba. I spent my youth in proximity to yet distant from my homeland. But being Palestinian is an experience that transcends borders. I see in my circumstances similarities to Israel's use of administrative detention, imprisonment without trial or charge, to strip Palestinians of their rights. I think of our friend Omar Khatib, who was incarcerated without charge or trial by Israel as he returned home from travel. I think of Gaza hospital director and pediatrician Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, who was taken captive by the Israeli military on December 27 and remains in an Israeli torture camp today. For Palestinians, imprisonment without due process is commonplace. I've always believed that my duty is not only to liberate myself from the oppressor, but also to liberate my oppressors from their hatred and fear. My unjust detention is indicative of the anti-Palestinian racism that both the Biden and Trump administrations have demonstrated over the past 16 months as the U.S. has continued to supply Israel with weapons to kill Palestinians and prevented international intervention. For decades, anti-Palestinian racism has driven efforts to expand U.S. laws and practices that are used to violently repress Palestinians, Arab Americans, and other communities. That is precisely why I am being targeted. While I await legal decisions that hold the future of my wife and child in the balance, those who enabled my targeting remain comfortably at Columbia University. President Shafiq Armstrong and Dean Yahimilo laid the groundwork for the U.S. government to target me by arbitrarily disciplining pro-Palestinian students and allowing viral doxing campaigns based on racism and disinformation to go unchecked. Columbia targeted me for my activism, creating a new authoritarian disciplinary office to bypass due process and silence students criticizing Israel. Columbia surrendered to federal pressure by disclosing student records to Congress and yielding to the Trump administration's latest threats. My arrest, the expulsion or suspension of at least 22 Columbia students, some stripped of their BA degrees just weeks before graduation, and the expulsion of SWC President Grant Minor on the eve of contract negotiations are clear examples. If anything, my detention is a testament to the strength of the student movement in shifting public opinion toward Palestinian liberation. Students have long been at the forefront of change, leading the charge against the Vietnam War, standing on the front lines of the civil rights movement, and driving the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Today, too, even if the public has yet to fully grasp it, it is students who steer us toward truth and justice. The Trump administration is targeting me as part of a broader strategy to suppress dissent. Visa holders, green card carriers, and citizens alike will all be targeted for their political beliefs in the weeks ahead. Students, advocates, and elected officials must unite to defend the right to protest for Palestine. At stake are not just our voices, but the fundamental civil liberties of all. Knowing fully that this moment transcends my individual circumstances, I hope nonetheless to be free to witness the birth of my firstborn child. Wow. Oh my gosh.
Absolutely powerful. It's a historic document. It should be mandatory reading for anybody who cares about human rights, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really quite amazing. Yeah.
I think
Oh,
Said.
you're muted. Let me unmute. Okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No.
I'm saying, I'm agreeing. It is a profound document. It's a historical document. I think it ought to be mandatory reading for the for U.S. Congress, for Chuck Schumer, for Mike Johnson, for all the others that so casually and cavalierly paint all Palestinians with a broad brush as people who are undesirable and so on. I mean, something that Bitar does all the time, by the way. They're the ones that apparently handed the list of hundreds of Palestinians in the United States of America. So they're the ones that keep saying they send messages and so on to the people of Gaza, to the Palestinians in the West Bank and others, and say nobody wants you. You are, you're a human refugee. Nobody would care for you. We can kill you. Nobody would care. We can do this. Nobody, and no one would care, and so on. And that is the group that the U.S. is dependent on to basically, as Craig said, to prosecute this case against Mahmoud.
Beitar, right? Yeah. Yeah. And they also go up to Norman Finkelstein. I think they tried to give him a pager.
Yeah.
Yeah. They also had there was a man involved in them, I forget his name, who is basically a revenge porn perpetrator. He got in trouble for engaging in revenge porn, and he's one of the people associated with them. It's out. I mean, it's really outrageous. And
these are thugs. These are followers.
They're thugs. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of their successors, they are dangerous. And if the government was really concerned about people affiliated with terrorism, they might want to take a look at some of these groups that are, you can make a ridiculous claim and say, if there's a protest against a country, I feel threatened by that as an individual. Nonsense. But these people, their modus operandi is to target individuals, to harass individuals, to get into the face of individuals, to threaten the safety and the well-being of individuals, and they're walking freely in our campuses and on our streets, threatening people, undercutting their human rights, and now collaborating with the government of the United States to violate the rights of people in this country.
Yeah, I think the disgusting Shai Davidai, the business professor, self-pitying maniac, histrionic, prima donna. I think was there's some weird split between Beitar and Shai Davidai, which is fabulous to me. I love when terrible people are fighting each other. But they also, I think, gave a list. He also gave a list of people to Rubio. Yeah. But yeah, like you were saying, it's a total inversion. You're supposed to be not welcome here, not able to come in as an immigrant if you support genocide, but actually no, we don't want you if you oppose genocide, right? And if you are an actual criminal, harassing, stalking thug, you'll be celebrated. But if you're just protesting a genocide peacefully, then you will be thrown into a van.
Yeah, and then you have Colombia pretending to be concerned about the well-being of students, but this guy David, everybody looks at this Shai Davidai guy, they just think he's a ridiculous clown. He doesn't matter. But he was on the faculty persecuting directly individual students, individual students who he is harassing and persecuting on the campus, and he's still moving about freely and continuing with
Layla, who we've had on the show. Layla, whose family is from the West Bank, who's a social work student, yeah.
So they would be funny, all of these clowns, if they weren't so dangerous.
Right.
They are. I mean, it's look, the government of Israel is basically a group of thugs. I mean, we've seen people that were with Kahanas, and so on. We see Ben Gvir, we see Smotrich and what they say, and so on. And the truth is, Israel is a gangster state, so it's not a surprise. I mean, I can say this with no compunction. It is a gangster state, and then it has been committing crimes against the Palestinians ever it was founded. This is not ever since it was founded. So there's
including against
nothing
your family.
new. But what we see now is this hyperpower, the United States of America, unlike any other time, is basically aiding and abetting this genocide or this aggression day in and day out, almost without any restrictions. We have seen that there's only a world of one power, which is the United States of America, ever since 1991. It does what it wants at the Security Council. The U.S. Has basically vetoed every resolution that comes even remotely to speak of the Palestinian rights or an end to a settlement or an end to the occupation. This occupation has gone on for so long. There are in excess of 750 checkpoints in the West Bank. They kill. I mean, look, Trump, I think, said, who holds dead bodies? Israel holds 680 dead Palestinians, including my young cousin, Ahmed Arikat, who was killed on June 22nd, 2020. And they are holding. And he was doing nothing. He was going to pick up his mother from a hair salon because they were going to his sister's wedding. He did not do anything. They shot him at will for no reason. So, I mean, this is the kind of not only double standards, but basically being, being party or being complicit, totally complicit. I mean, Israel, as we have heard, both Lloyd Austin and the former Secretary of Defense and what's his name? The former Secretary of State, so and Anthony Blinken, so we heard them say before the Senate hearing committee, and so on, that Israel would not last 3 days without our arms and without anything. It would not be able to do this kind of bombing for 3 days straight with this kind of intensity and so on. So this genocide, this war, including last night, and who knows, what comes next, basically, is basically empowered and enabled by the United States of America, period.
Yeah, and Said, I actually thought of you. I thought exactly of you when I read the Donald Trump statement from, I believe it was from like March 5th. And he said, one of the things he said in that statement, he said, Shalom Hamas means hello and goodbye. You can choose, release all the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it is over for you. Only sick and twisted people keep bodies, and you are sick and twisted. And I immediately thought of you and our discussion about this and how I didn't know about this until you mentioned this on my show a couple of years ago, that they held your cousin's body, and that's actually a thing that they do. Like, that's not an aberration.
No, just done day in and day out, So
just as a way of humiliating and contrling like everything.
And let me just say one thing. I mean, you listen to all these people that speak of the hostages, and we sympathize with the hostages. We sympathize with their ordeal. Nobody wants to see anyone killed or destroyed in captivity. Israel has basically killed most of those who are dead. But what about the thousands of hostages that Israel took at will, from the West Bank every day? I mean, they just round up dozens and hundreds of people and they put them there. What do you call that? And you say this is for bargaining. I mean, this is exactly what Israel said, and it does not allow them. I mean, we listened to Mahmoud letter, and he describes the situation in the detention camp. That is a page out of Israel's book that it does day in and day out against Palestinians.
Yeah, and it's it's like what always kind of the double standard is just striking. But I feel like what also is so rich is that, like, we all know that Israel is a racist country that is founded on genocide and is anachronistically founded on genocide, right? Like, during a time when other places were decolonizing, they hate Palestinians. But what's so rich is that, like, they don't care about the hostages. They care way more about killing Palestinians than they do about, their raison d'etre, right, is like a safe space for Jews, a safe haven for Jews, where Jewish life and Jewish safety are prioritized. They don't care. They are happy to bomb the buildings where the hostages were being held. They shot those 3 guys because they're just shooting out, ask questions later. And all these people who claim it's just so sick.
While carrying white flags.
Right, while carrying white flags and speaking in Hebrew.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's so and then just some people are like, it is scary to see otherwise smart people. I guess it's just like total tribalism and brainwashing, but their logic just stops when it comes to this issue. Although I have to say that this is like, it's getting harder and harder. Like even Ann Coulter and William Crystal are critical of the kidnapping, of the attempted deportation of Mahmoud Khalil. So if you're
I saw Ann Coulter's tweet, whatever it was, the message. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you guys have both been so generous with your time. Anything else you want to make sure that you mention, either of you, especially you, Saeed, because
well, yes, absolutely. I think that we have to look at what's going on now. I think that Netanyahu feels that all constraints have been lifted on him to do whatever he wants. He knows that he has the total support of this administration. Nobody is going to even threaten. There's going to be no statement from Blinken or others and so on who say, we caution Israel against doing that, although they didn't mean it, So they have, it's crazy. Not a single truck or whatever has gone into Gaza since March 2nd. There's a population of 2.2 million people basically starving. Basically, they don't have enough food to eat. Basically, they don't have enough things for their babies, their children, and so on. And on top of it, they're being bombed to kingdom come. All hell, will break loose, as both Witkoff and Donald Trump have threatened. I think this is really a very critical moment that we all have to focus on and to speak of, because he basically felt that I can, flaunt whatever agreement I have signed. It shows that the United States of America is not a country of its word. They're the ones that basically oversaw this process and arrived at this agreement and getting what they want, basically. And now he just basically said, I'm not committed to that by any way, and I want to start all over again. In his own words, the rules of the game have changed, and that's what he said. So what is the value of international agreements? What is the value of an agreement like the one we saw? If let's say the stronger party can say, I'm free of that restriction, I'm free of my obligation under this agreement. That is really very dangerous.
Right. Yeah. One other thing I thought we could do before ending is show the video, because you mentioned it, Craig. I thought we could show the video of Mahmoud getting detained, and then I want to show you guys one more video that relates to Yemen, if that's okay.
Going to be under arrest. So turn around.
Okay, let's not. Stop resisting. Okay, he's not resisting. He's giving me his phone. Okay, he's not. I understand. He's not resisting.
There's no need for this. Don't worry about it. You're gonna have to come with us. Don't worry. I'm coming with you. Don't worry. No one's resisting. No one's getting worked up.
You guys really don't need to be doing all of that.
It's fine. It's fine.
حبيبي كيف بدي اتصل فيك؟
Take Amy. Call Amy.
Okay. Hi Amy. Yeah, they just handcuffed him and took him. I don't know what to do. And what should I do? I don't know. Noor. Let me ask. Can we get a name, please? Can we get your name? I understand the lawyer is asking for your name.
Go back, please. Go over there. We don't give our names.
The lawyer's asking for your name. He's saying they don't give their names.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They'll be taken to immigration custody at 26 Federal Plaza.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
They'll be taken to immigration custody at 26 Federal Plaza.
She said they're taking him to 26 Federal Plaza. Can you please specify what agency is taking him, please? Excuse me. They're not talking to me. I don't know. He's literally driving off. Like, and he didn't even answer any of my questions.
Oof. Imagine they just came back from dinner.
Yeah. And I'm afraid that's probably just the beginning.
Right.
This is happening all over the country, with people who are speaking out against these atrocities. It's also happening to migrants in the country, as we said, Venezuelan migrants who were here, because their country was collapsing because of the intentional meddling in Venezuela, sanctions, behind the scenes shenanigans of the United States government. And just because, you have a tattoo, you can find yourself being dragged off and put into a notorious torture prison in El Salvador,
Right.
a rented dungeon agreed with Donald Trump for $6 million without any due process, without any hearing, without any trial. Innocent people are undoubtedly among those who have been shipped off in this way. So we are really in a situation of lawlessness. I think everyone in this country is now at risk, and it just goes to show you what I said some days ago is that Israel has been stripping away the human rights of the Palestinian people for 80 years. Now, effectively that contagion has found its way into Western countries, Germany, the UK, the United States, where human rights are being eroded in the name of this small, oppressive foreign regime in the Middle East. And it is a human rights story as old as the notion of human rights, that impunity always leads to more violations. And if we don't stop this thing now, I hate to think what's coming.
Yes, one sentence is the Israelization of America. They have been able to Israelize America, and that's what they want. They drag it into the mud. They want to make it, sort of an outlaw nation in many ways, not being based or not functioning on the basis and the premise of law, including international law, but basically to suit its own, illegal activities and existence and so on, occupation. Now they are. I heard stories where they are not going to be using the word occupied anymore, that it is not occupied. They probably changed the name or the term West Bank to Judea and Samaria. There are some members of Congress have basically instructed their staff to use, Judea and Samaria. We're talking about the West Bank and so on. So yes, I mean, Israel has been able basically to drag the United States of America down to its pathetic level.
And so speaking of, it's very scary, like the ignoring the rule of law so brazenly is very scary. And now we have also this on behalf of this genocidal nation, although there's always the question of, is Israel our tool, or are we a tool of Israel? It's probably, what'd you say?
Yes.
Both. Yeah, I think it's a pretty symbiotic thing right now, feedback loop. But here is a clip about Yemen. And this is, let me just get that clip. Hold on one second. So this is asked if they'll send American troops into Yemen. Pentagon spokesman, this is a Pentagon spokesman who was asked if they're going to send American troops into Yemen. So let's take a listen to what he says.
This operation includes sending ground troops into Yemen. If so, how do you achieve your objective of making them say enough without sending ground troops?
Well, I'll tell you, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for us to talk about force posture from this podium, because as a commander who's been on the battlefield, it's very, very important to keep the enemy guessing, keep your adversaries guessing. Now, that's not to say that we've got ground troops in Yemen. That's not to say that we're sending ground troops in, but it's difficult to talk about that stuff for operational security reasons from the podium.
Great.
It's outrageous. You know, the U.S. is attacking the poorest country in the Middle East,
Yes.
country that it's been bombing for over 2 decades now. It's violating international law. This is an act of aggression under international law. It's slaughtering civilians in this poor country who are under those bombs. In the process, it's exacerbating what was already there: a famine, a medical crisis, displacement of people in this poor, sanctioned, suffering country. And whether or not they send in ground troops, they are putting U.S. soldiers at risk in the process, because they are there in the ships and the planes that are attacking, trying to, could very well provoke a broader regional war, spending billions of dollars to bomb these people when billions of dollars could relieve their misery for the first time in decades. And all of this for one reason, which is to assist Israel in committing a genocide in Palestine, because this is all happening because the Ansar Allah, the Houthis, the Yemenis, have been imposing a blockade on ships going to supply Israel, and that just can't be tolerated because it was working. The port of Eilat was bankrupted by this. Yeah. Nothing was flowing in. And so this has no other purpose. All of these billions of dollars and international crimes being perpetrated by the U.S. only to support Israel's right to carry out a genocide in Palestine. Remember, the Houthis said that they will stop when the genocide stops, when the siege stops. They stopped entirely during the ceasefire. They respected the ceasefire. When Israel reinitiated the full-scale siege and genocide, they returned to blocking ships going to supply Israel. So this is entirely an investment in supporting genocide in the Middle East.
The timing is far more cynical even than that. I mean, I agree with everything that Craig said, but the timing, the bombing of Yemen was done like a day or two before Israel resumed the war, in a way, because they feel that, for instance, Hezbollah or the resistance of Axis and so on is no longer able to aid the people in Gaza or to aid Hamas. They looked at the Houthis are being probably the only group that can, in effect, come to their aid or appear to come to their aid and so on. Now, the United States have always destroyed Arab countries, really, for Israel in many ways, for oil and for Israel. I mean, I served in Iraq. Iraq was virtually like when I got there and when I left it, and until today. It's like taking a clay pot and throwing it up there and break it. The Americans did not do anything of use in Iraq. I mean, I remember, I don't want to delve into another issue altogether, but I remember there was something called the PRTs, the Project Reconstruction Team. It was basically the Bush administration with these young Republicans and so on, with billions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And they start working on a project, then they talk to their friend, and they say, I'm working on, instead of building a school, I'm working on building this and so on. They get excited, they drop it, and they start another project. They never completed not one project. And it's not the intention of the United States to do any project. So they did that on behalf of Israel. They destroyed Libya, basically on behalf of Israel. They destroyed Syria. I mean, no matter where how you stand on the former regime and so on. But that's exactly what they have done. Now, this Syria is not only a failed state, but it's a divided, fragmented failed state. Israel attacks at will. They have destroyed everything. It goes on. And not one word from the United States of America against Israel's aggression. Not one word against taking the rest of the Golan and so on. I remember I asked Miller right before the end of their administration and so on, the day they attacked and occupied the rest of the Golan Heights, and he said, well, Israel says it is temporary. And I asked him, do you know anything temporary in Israel's history of occupying airplanes? Never. I mean, so this is what the U.S. does. I mean, the U.S. is a strong imperial power. It's very aggressive. It has something like 21 major bases in these countries, and there are 2 in Qatar, many in the United Arab Emirates, many in in Saudi Arabia. We don't know how many. We know that there are 13 in Jordan. There are bases everywhere. And these bases, for what? Basically to protect their whatever client states. I think the United States of America does not have allies. It has client states, and that is to protect them.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much. This was really great, and I'm so glad that I had both of you in conversation because I thought it was so interesting to hear you guys converse. Yeah.
Me too.
Absolutely. I'm quite honored and to be with Craig. I mean, this is
I was going to say the same thing. So nice to finally be together. And have a chance.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, we'll have to do it one day in person.
Absolutely.
Saeed, I was on a panel with Saeed. It was great that you invited me to, and it was me, you, Layla, Al-Arian,
and Ryan. Oh yeah, it was great.
And then it was on C-SPAN. So Craig, you'll be proud of me. I talked about I criticized Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, and it's now officially on C-SPAN.
I'm going to I got to see it.
Yeah.
They fired Adam Bowler because Jake Tapper asked him, and he said, "Look, we're not an agent of Israel. We're not agents of Israel." But apparently, that was so bad that they fired him right away. And they're the ones that appointed him. They're the ones that told him, "Go conduct whatever you can with Hamas." But he came out and said, "It's funny. Hamas people don't have horns coming out of their head. They're people like us. They're nice people, as
nice guys,
nice guys, whatever." So that they did not like that, and lo and behold, he was fired the next day.
Yeah,
anyway,
insane. Anyway, well, I'm going to now play. Let's see, any super chats relate to you guys? I'm just gonna Jay Blue. Thank you for the super sticker so much. Sakar Papa writes, "Make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they'll believe it." Joseph Goebbels, sounds like the fake beheaded story. Yeah. Corina Kleis, thank you for that super chat. IS writes, "What pains me is that there's nothing we seem to be able to do. I wake up today to relive the horror of the poor people in Gaza." The super sticker, thank you for more. "When I think about conservatives admitting that Israel is over the line, I remember that scene from Canadian Bacon, 'Don't be a sore winner.'" And a super chat, thank you from Jean Saint Ange. But you know what? Let's end on what pains me is that there's nothing we seem to be able to do. I wake up today to relive the horror of the poor people in Gaza. It's interesting. I'm working on this documentary about Holocaust survivors who are protesting the genocide in Gaza and basically saying like not in our name, and never again means never again for anyone. And one of the women who wrote to me today, and she's like, "I feel the pain of the people of Yemen and the people of Gaza. I can't stand it. I can't take it." And what can be done? I mean, it's good that people feel pain, because if you didn't feel this pain, you'd be a sociopath. But do you guys have any advice on what people can do to not feel helpless?
Well, I think solidarity is everything. You have to join together with other people who care, who have the principles, who can stand up. You can also take the place of those who are in more vulnerable situations, like maybe students who are vulnerable, or people who are here on visas, or whatever the case may be. But in the end, we've spoken about this before. I remember very well the movement against apartheid in South Africa, and what changed it was people, because the governments of the West, the U.S. government, supported apartheid right up until through the 1980s, and what changed it was churches and synagogues and mosques and labor unions and human rights defenders and peace activists and students and people like all of us, who just made it impossible for those horrors to continue. So boycott, divest, sanction, educate, prosecute, protest, demonstrate. When they tell us to shut up, when they try to intimidate us, we have to stand up taller and speak out louder. Inaction is the surest way to become depressed. It's the surest way to become defeatist, and it's surest way for them to win. But when we resist, there's hope.
I couldn't add anything to how profound Greg was and his statement, his last statement. And it is true. It is indeed if we allow ourselves to be intimidated, or if we can't see beyond this moment of fear and so on, then we lose. And very much like efforts in the past to perpetuate whether apartheid and other movements and so on, Jim Crow laws, all these things. And the U.S. history is rife with similarities. So you have to speak up.
Right. Be on the same side as that student who got expelled for an anti-Nazi rally.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both so much. It's such an honor to speak with you. I'm going to stay on and introduce a pre-taped interview I did with two doctors, American doctors who are in Gaza.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you so much,
Thank you
Saeed
very
and
much.
Craig.
Thank you. Thank you. Great.
Okay, have a great
Thank you
night.
both. Okay, bye-bye.
That was those were both amazing guests, and it was really great to have them in conversation. Because I've interviewed each of them at one time, but having them together was really cool. So right now, this is the third part of the program, tonight's show. And I wanted to, we obviously stream at 7 p.m. and that is like 1 a.m. in Gaza, but I wanted to get a sense of what was happening. And so I interviewed earlier today, two doctors who are American doctors who are in Gaza right now. One is Dr. Feroz Sidwa, who is an American trauma surgeon volunteering at Nasser Hospital. And the other one is Dr. Mark Perlmutter, who is an orthopedic and hand surgeon. So we're going to play two clips from that interview. And then the rest will be releasing other parts of the interview. And then we do have some of this that's Patreon only. And it's about, as I said, it's me. I talked to Feroz about Norman Finkelstein and Alan Dershowitz. And also we show some things on the Patreon only part that we can't show on YouTube because it would get us banned or demonetized, because it shows it's very hard. I mean, it's literally children who have been killed or maimed. Okay, so let's play part one of this video.
As to Gaza, we knew that the acute trauma that we took care of last year would turn into chronic injuries that needed reconstruction. And that's why we're back this time. Empirically, what brought us here in the first place, and that reasoning still continues, is that we're both embarrassed at what our American government is doing. If it wasn't for the irresponsible nature of our past two presidents and our legislature, tens of thousands of children, I'm not talking about the adults now, just the children would be alive. And there are certainly tens of thousands more that are buried under rubble that will never be found. And that's our tax dollars. That's our American bombs that we've donated to an irresponsible fascist government, the Israeli government, that caused this horrible carnage that we're seeing. And of course, you know that the bombing started again last night.
What are you seeing right now? I mean, there's been a resumption of bombings. So how did you experience the resumption of bombings? Like, what did you observe, and how did it affect patients?
So Mark and I are at different hospitals. I'm at Nasser Medical Complex, which is, I think it's the second biggest hospital in Gaza after Shifa, but Shifa doesn't really exist anymore. So Nasser is seeing all of the trauma from basically almost all of Rafah and almost all of Khan Yunis, including the entire Mawasi area south of Deir al-Balah. Last night was the standard mass casualty event that I remember from European hospital, except for that we could actually get a little bit of stuff done. We could actually help many more people because it was much, much better organized this time. And that's really, that is 100% entirely due to the Palestinians, especially one surgeon in particular, who's well known here, Khalid al-Ser, just taking it upon himself to make the institution capable of handling mass casualty events. Now, it can't go on forever, if we have 2 or 3 of these, I'm sure the stocks of everything in the hospital will be depleted. And certainly we won't have any critical care resources or surgical resources left. But Khalid stood outside the hospital all night and directed traffic, which seems like this any security guard can do that. That is by far the hardest job in a mass casualty situation. It's usually up to like the chair of a department or something like that. Khalid's 33 years old. But in terms of the casualties we saw, this is the same thing as before. Kids ripped to shreds. So I'm a trauma surgeon. My job is basically to stop people from bleeding to deaths and to stop them from dying immediately from trauma-related causes. So I went to what's called the red area, where people are at immediate risk of death. And the first thing I did was find probably like a 3-something-year-old girl who had a brain injury. She had a wound here. She had wounds all over her face. She had agonal breathing and her pulse was thready. And I had to just the first thing I had to do was tell her daddy she's going to die. There's nothing I can do about it, and move on. The next kid I saw was probably about the same age, 3 or 4. Sorry, yeah, I know sometimes these things are not easy to hear. I apologize.
No, don't apologize. I mean, it's just horrific.
Yeah, no, it's not pleasant. That's for sure.
But people need to know this, especially because, as you pointed out, our government is facilitating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like Mark said, none of this happened. The Israelis aren't doing any of this. We're doing this. And I assume you're American too. But we're doing this. The Israelis can do whatever they want. We're the ones facilitating it. So it's on us. I hate it when people say we're complicit. Let's say like we're complicit in Israel's crimes. No. We're committing the crimes together. That's the problem.
So, Feroz, while we wait for Feroz to rejoin, can you talk about what you've been observing?
Last night, there was no less than 65 or 70 horribly injured people in that trauma bay at all times. There's expansive tents here, a 2,000-pound bomb, and the shrapnel from that bomb can travel great through many people before it stops. And the amount of carnage that just a single bomb produces is impressive. We've heard a dozen bombs go off in the area. We actually heard them coming in before they exploded. We heard the jets overhead. We heard the drones before then to assist in their targeting. The casualty events that we saw were, as Feroz had said, mostly children. Most of them are refugees. They're from the north, which was thoroughly destroyed. The north had most of the population at Gaza City, over 1 million people. Many of them have been displaced to this area. This hospital is very small. It only has 2 operating rooms. And so we were operating in labor and delivery units last night. And we had extremely substantial injuries. The amount of carnage that we saw in this very small hospital last night would have paralyzed any teaching institution's trauma bay for an entire day. I'm close to UNC Chapel Hill and Duke, and neither one of those institutions could have effectively dealt with what this little hospital saw just last night. Obviously, they would have dealt with it, but it would have overwhelmed that facility. Just to give some scale to your viewership of what we mean when Feroz says mass casualty event, we mean dozens and dozens of people coming in, every single one of which requires personal, intimate, immediate attention. And you often have to step over people who you think have less of a chance of living so that you can deal with people who will live.
How much of an actual ceasefire was there up until last night?
Oh, no. Of course there was. And I operated on 2 days ago of 5-year-old boy who received shrapnel in his forearm and lacerated the most critical nerve in your hand. And I had to take, with Feroz's assistance, a nerve out of the back of his leg and use 5 segments of that nerve to graft the nerve because a large piece of shrapnel destroyed the main nerve in his hand that controls function. And there's probably 6 to 10 people a day who died before the bombings of last night. There's sniper rifles. There's a purported buffer zone that's doubles the size from where it used to be. And there's arbitrary shootings from the wall or from the buffer zone. Indeed, one of the premier medical students in Gaza, who's been hanging out with us last year and this year, was evacuated from her house, which is at the border of the buffer zone, because they're doubling its size, a house that her family's lived in for 100 years. And they've been evacuated and now live outside of European Hospital, which was a tent neighborhood, which was thoroughly bombed last night. But that's the only safe place that they can evacuate to. So there never was a ceasefire. Israel has never honored a ceasefire in its entire history. They've always negotiated in stages pursuant to the surrender of some hostages, and whenever a sufficient number, but not necessarily all of the hostages, have been recovered, the ceasefire is broken by Israel at all times. This was predictable. Perhaps Feroz can lend more historical perspective on that.
No, you're 100% right. That not only was it predictable, it was literally announced repeatedly. When Smotrich removed his people from the coalition, he literally announced that, oh, don't worry, Netanyahu promised me that in late February the war is going to restart and then we'll rejoin the coalition. So it's no big deal. And Netanyahu made similar statements constantly. So in terms of the ceasefire, the first person that I took care of here with a gunshot wound was, at least I think he was the first person, it's hard to remember now, was a probably 20-year-old guy shot in the left chest in Rafah. The Israelis have constructed this enormous sniper tower in the Philadelphia corridor on the border with Egypt. And the Palestinians believe, again, how they could know this, I have no clue, but they believe that it's actually a fully automated gun system. I don't really know what the right term is, but like kind of a fully automated sniper system that just shoots on based on AI and other such things. And given what we know about the experimental nature of this war, it's entirely possible. But nevertheless, there is a very large, very tall sniper tower that can fire up to a kilometer, at least a kilometer away, I should say. I had coffee with a cardiologist here who lives in Rafah. This is kind of a wild story. He has, I think he said 4 kids. The youngest is a 4-year-old girl. So really her only memories are from, her only like actual memories that she can remember are from the past, since October 7th. And she,
the bombing, but the bombing has started here again.
Really?
Yeah, the 2 explosions just went off.
Really? Okay. No, we'll see how long this lasts for. What was I saying? Oh yeah, but a few nights ago, bullets from this sniper tower in the Philadelphia corridor flew into their home, and the whole family hit the deck, except for this little girl. She just kept dancing and singing, and her mom and dad yelled, I don't know her name, but yell, come to us, what are you doing? Don't worry. And she said, don't worry, the bullets are all the way up there, because she's this little girl that hitting kind of above the refrigerator. So they had to crawl to this kid and tackle her to try and keep her safe, because she literally doesn't know anything else, But anyway, point being, no, the Israelis certainly have not honored the ceasefire, and not just from the standpoint of not shooting and bombing. But the ceasefire, it was published in the Times of Israel. It's not like it's some secret what it says. There were, I forget the exact numbers, I'll get them wrong, but I think it was 200, some hundreds of thousands of tents and mobile homes that were to be allowed into Gaza to house the population. That was not done. A few were let in, but not anywhere near, not within orders of magnitude of what was written in paper, signed by both parties, and guaranteed by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. There was no free flow of aid into the territory. There was no free flow of commerce into the territory. You can hear airplanes now. There was no increase. There was no significant increase in medical evacuations of combatants, which is actually part of the injured combatants, which is part of the ceasefire. 50 a day with, I think, 3 companions, if I remember right, were supposed to be evacuated, and there was supposed to be an unlimited flow of medical evacuees through the Rafah border for civilians. None of that was done. None of it was done. Ehud Barak was he was a former defense minister and prime minister of Israel after Operation Pillar of Defense, I think, in 2012. Yeah, it was after that. The cabinet was kind of in a bind, because they had to stop the war because they still had this problem with the Goldstone report and stuff like that. But they hadn't achieved any of their war aims. And the cabinet was saying, no, we can't sign this ceasefire deal. It's humiliating. It basically says we lost this battle. And Barak just calmly said, look, a day after this piece of paper is signed, no one will remember what's written on it. Don't worry about it. It's always been the attitude. And that's not, I just want to say, it's not that surprising. That was our attitude towards our natives too. That's how we treated our treaties with them. It's not that surprising that the U.S. continues to do the same thing to the Israelis fighting their natives. It's I should say fighting, getting rid of their natives.
Right.
Okay, I've got to run. There's multiple ambulances coming in, multiple bombs going off. I know the ER is going to be filled, so I have to say goodbye.
Okay,
Go,
well,
Lord.
stay safe, and thank you for all that you do. Sorry, but so that's one part of this interview that I did with these really incredibly brave doctors. It was really incredible speaking to them. Again, that's Dr. Feroz Sidwa, who's an American trauma surgeon. He's volunteering at Nasser Hospital right now, like as we speak. And that's the other one who had to go because there was the ambulances were coming. Dr. Perlmutter, who's an orthopedic and hand surgeon, and he is right now at the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital. So this is another part of the interview, and this is where Mark comes back to join us. Mark, you just joined us again. Do you have any updates about what you just witnessed?
There was several bombs that went off. 2 people died by report. They weren't brought into the hospital. Several open fractures, and there are some bowel and head injuries that are going to the OR. Well, in fact, one of the head injuries has the open fractures, and they have to be stabilized first, and we'll take care of their legs and arm fracture once the head is stabilized.
Wow.
So that'll be later on tonight.
By the way, I showed Feroz the photos that you had sent me. This is a photo of like joyful looking children. I mean, it's unbelievable. They were raising like peace signs.
Yeah, so these are the kids that were still praying in this mosque that didn't have a single standing wall in it. So we took a photograph together, and I asked the imam what they were praying for and what their prayers were, because they were saying a collective prayer. And beautifully, albeit ironically, they were praying for Israel to forgive them. Right.
They were praying to forgive. They were forgiving the Israelis and praying for them, or they were asking to be.
They were praying for the Israelis to be forgiven by Allah.
Oh my God!
Because they're not anti-Israel, they're not anti-American, they're not at all anti-Jew. They're just anti-Zionist.
Right.
They're sophisticated. They understand the difference. These young kids understood the difference. And in fact, in that photograph, there's one person who's complicit with the destruction of that mosque and the killing of 30 or 40 of their children friends, and that was the one wearing the hat, me. It's I, metaphorically meaning an American, that's responsible for the death of their colleagues and the destruction of that mosque and the burying 1,000 or 20,000 or maybe 40,000 of other children their age under the rubble. It's I that am responsible for the destruction of 1,000 mosques and 3 of the oldest Christian churches on the face of the earth, which is an ironic thing why we have such a tremendous Christian Zionist support for what's going on when the 3 stunningly beautiful historical churches got destroyed in the same bombing, and deliberately. They were specific targeted.
So that again is those are 2 scenes from this interview I did with those 2 amazing doctors who are so brave, and I have so much admiration for them. And they're very incredibly strong people to go there. I asked Feroz about, if he fears for his own life, and he basically says, if you sign up to do medicine there, you have to be okay with that possibility. But I just thought that that anecdote about the children, I thought was like just stunning. And yeah, that's what they're doing. I mean, they told me these stories about how hard they worked on these operations, and they talked about it during this interview, and then they sent me a text and it was like, oh yeah, so this person I just worked on, they wound up dying, this person wound up dying. It's just like the level of indignity, unfairness, tragedy, outrage, dehumanization, all unnecessary, like absolutely unnecessary, paid for by our tax dollars. And just the idea of like putting so much work and effort and skill and talent into trying to save someone's life, and then that person dies. I can't imagine it, but they're amazing people. As are these children who were praying for basically the people who are trying to exterminate them. Someone wrote victim mentality. I actually don't think that's it. I mean, whatever. You can have a political debate about it, but someone else wrote in the comments, highly evolved souls. And, it's not a requirement that you have empathy for your oppressors, but that certainly is something that, there's a long tradition of that. Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi. Again, you can have problems with nonviolence all you want, but that does exist, that way of thinking. Yeah. So anyway, I guess I'll leave you. I'm trying to leave on a hopeful note. I guess the hopeful note is that there are people who do this type of stuff, who risk their lives and save people's lives, and they won't be able to save everyone's lives, but they do save other people's lives. And yeah, thank you for coming tonight. I do have, thank you so much for the guests. I have an extended interview on Patreon at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. It's not the medical stuff, except there is a part that we can't show on YouTube because we'll get kicked off. So if you go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show, you'll see this funny chat I had with Feroz about Norman Finkelstein and Alan Dershowitz, and you'll see some very not at all funny stuff where they go over various patient injuries. We should probably make those into two pieces, I'm realizing, team, because there will probably be people who want to see the fun chat with Finkelstein and about Finkelstein and Dershowitz, and don't want to see the very upsetting physical photos of people's bodies. But I do think it's important for people to see them. I mean, yeah. But here's the happy ending. Is I'll just show you guys Bucky. Bucky. Yeah. And solidarity is important. That's true. What Craig said. Solidarity is very important. Here's Bucky again. He has a bow tie on. He's a big fan of Brad, by the way. Bucky, say hi. He came running in here because someone's cooking and the smoke detector came on. So my door opened because he just came in. And he's leaving. Anyway, thank you so much, Brad. Thank you so much, Nate. Thank you so much, Phantomus Fanta. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Okay, I'm down.